So the other day, I gave a list of my top 10 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport of mixed martial arts right now. And at number 1, I picked Henry Cejudo. Now, he is number 1 in my pound-for-pound rankings, and that got me thinking, what is his potential as a pay-per-view star? So I've been thinking about that a lot for the last 2 days, and I think he actually has real potential to be a pay-per-view star for the UFC. Now, when I say pay-per-view star, I don't mean like a Conor McGregor in the stratosphere, Ronda Rousey, Brock Lesnar type of star, but somebody like a John Jones who can very competently sell a very significant amount of pay-per-views and do good business for the company and for himself. Now, the reason why I think Henry Cejudo can be one of these guys, I would say along with Colby Covington and Israel Adesanya as the 3 guys that could take the baton as future UFC pay-per-view draws. And the reason why I think Henry probably has the best chance out of any of these guys to do it is, he's a double champion right now, and he's actually a guy who is going to try to defend both belts, something that, Conor McGregor and Daniel Cormier, other double champions, never really attempted to do. Now, that's easier said than done. I mean, bantamweight is a minefield of top contenders. But outside of just his championship pedigree, I mean, he's a Spanish speaker of Mexican descent, and if you look at Mexico is a hotbed for combat sports, and they have Andy Ruiz, sure, as the heavyweight champion in boxing, but in mixed martial arts, they're kind of starving for a star. I mean, Nate Diaz is kind of Mexican, but he's more of a SoCal gangster, and I think maybe Yair Rodriguez, but, he's a little bit down the featherweight rankings. He's not a real championship caliber fighter, at least not yet. So Henry Cejudo can really corner that market. And then you have to think he's an Olympic gold champion for the United States. And the United States doesn't typically get behind their fighters in the same way that literally any other nation gets behind their fighters. Like Conor McGregor, all of Ireland's behind him. George St. Pierre, all of Canada's behind him. If you get a Mexican fighter, you'll have all of Mexico behind you. Swedish fighter, Gustafsson, all of Sweden behind you. If you're from basically any other country in the world, you get a massive push by your country. You get a massive support from your home country. Americans don't really get that benefit so much. But I feel like Cejudo, as a gold medalist, might be able to get some of that domestic support. So he's got that domestic support. He's got a little bit of that international support from Mexico. I mean, a lot more. He's probably got more international support than domestic support. But I think that domestic support, the international support, and then the most important thing is winning. If Henry Cejudo can win a couple of fights here, if he can actually defend both belts, I think that he is without a doubt going to be able to move into that pay-per-view star type of conversation. Now, the UFC needs to help Henry in this matter. What they need to do is they need to build up his championship title fights properly. You don't need to just roll these things out under the table and not promote them properly. I think you need to put big bucks into promoting these fights. You need to get them in big press conferences, like Izzy and Whitaker just were. You need to put him in positions. You need to get him in front of the camera and let him be cringy. Let him cringe it up. People are going to hate it or they're going to like it. Either way, they're going to want to see him win or they're going to want to see him lose. And every time he performs, if he wins, he gets to just double up and increase his star power every single time significantly. So if the UFC promotes him properly and he promotes himself properly, which he has been doing, he gets in front of any media outlet that will listen, and he says as cringy of things as possible. So if the UFC gives him the platforms and he capitalizes, which he will do, and then he wins, which that is the hardest part, he could for sure, by the end of 2020, I'm thinking, be on a John Jones level of pay-per-view star. If you look at, let's look at what 2020 is going to hold for Cejudo potentially. This is just hypothetical because he's going to be out for the rest of 2019. He had the shoulder surgery after the Moraes fight. So at the start of 2020, first fight for him, he has to defend his belt at flyweight against Joby. Joby is like Frankie Edgar, where he's just been the top contender at his division for so long, but he had 2 losses to the champion like Frankie did to Aldo. Joby had 2 losses to Mighty Mouse, but he could just about beat everybody else in the division, / could beat everybody else in the division. He has a win over Henry Cejudo already. So the UFC needs to give Joby that fight. You can build it up because, I mean, Joby has beaten Henry. He's one of only 2 guys to beat him. So that's a really marketable fight that you could build up. Henry will come out with some hilarious. I don't find his gimmicks that hilarious, but I do like them and I applaud them. But he's gonna come out with some gimmick, like he did against Dillashaw with the snake or Moraes with the magic hat, and he's gonna find a way to try to build some hype. But the UFC has to give him a little bit of a stage to do it. And if they do, and he wins that fight, I mean, while that's going on, at bantamweight, you have to do an interim title fight. And this is really, I think, the key to building Cejudo into a superstar, is that while he's off defending one belt, you need to create an interim champion in the other division. So that way, you can have Cejudo go back up, belt over each shoulder. He's a 2-division champ. And he's taking on another champion, so you get 3 belts on the poster. The UFC loves the belt as a promotional tool. You get 3 belts on a poster, and it's always a title unification bout. So you can just make these fights into bigger fights by having an interim title in there. And I think the interim title makes a lot of sense when you've got a champion who's champion across 2 divisions, because they just can't be simply defending often enough to justify not having interim champions. He's only going to be able to defend each belt once a year, twice at an absolute max. So I think interim champions, this is where interim champions really, really make sense. So you do a bantam interim championship with Aljamain Sterling and Cody Sandhagen, who Cody is now, I think he might even have surpassed Aljo in my mind as the top contender at bantamweight. So you have those guys competing for an interim title, while Cejudo goes and fights Joby at the start of 2020. Let's say he gets through Joby. We're going to assume that Cejudo's going to win these fights. That is the hardest part here in building Cejudo into a pay-per-view star. He has to win these fights against world-class opponents. But let's just say he beats Joby. Then he can go on and take on the winner in that interim title fight of Aljo and Cody Sandhagen. You win that fight. While that fight's going on, you can have a Uriah Faber, Piotr Yan fight coming down the pipe. If Uriah wins that, that's a big name for Henry to take on after, towards the end of 2020, because you would take on Joby at the start of 2020. Then mid-ish 2020, he could fight the interim bantamweight champion to unify the belts. And then at the end of 2020, you could give him a big name fight like the Uriah Faber fight if Uriah gets another win under his belt. Or I really like the idea. I've already pitched it. I think Cruz and Edgar need to fight. And you know what? The winner of that fight, you could justify as the next contender to fight Cejudo at the end of 2020. And I think that if Cejudo can beat Joby, unify an interim bantamweight title, and then beat a big name at the end of 2020, like a Cruz, a Faber, or an Edgar. And while that's going on, the flyweight division, you're developing another interim champion, with Matt Schnell or Davison Figueiredo, Jussier Formiga. These guys, there's not really a clear next step at flyweight after Joby. So you let flyweight percolate a little bit. You let it percolate. You let the contenders match up against each other. You create an interim champion there. And then at the start of 2021, boom. Now you've got Cejudo, 2 belts, unifying another interim championship. And you have them fight, basically, 1 flyweight fight and 1 bantamweight fight. A year. You constantly develop these interim champions, and then you've got these every single one of Cejudo's fights is going to be a huge fight as long as he's double champ. And you can, and the UFC is smart enough to create these interim champs and build these fights as these champion versus champion title unification. Big deal. Put Cejudo on a stage, give him a platform, give him press conferences. You know, he'll cringe it up. He'll sell the pay-per-views. People are going to want to see him get his ass kicked. Some people are going to want to see the cringiness continue, like me. And I really think that by the end of 2020, we could see Cejudo on par with like a John Jones type of pay-per-view star. What do you guys think? Do you think Cejudo has the potential to be a pay-per-view star? What do you think about the idea of constantly having an interim champion at whatever weight class he's not currently going to defend at, so that way you develop these mega fights that have 3 belts on the poster? You know, I think that I'm pro interim championships because the fighters get paid like they're proper champions, and you know, it creates more exciting matchups because just the visual of seeing an extra belt alone is compelling. So yeah, what do you think? Is Cejudo a potential pay-per-view star? Do you think he can do it by the end of 2020 like I do? Who do you think are other big stars coming down the pipe? Let me know. Please subscribe. Please like the video. Follow me on socials. Until next time, cheers, friends.